everyone. My name is Roberto Croci. I'm the Managing Director for Microsoft for Startups across Middle East and Africa. I am based here in Dubai since a good 7 years. A few words about myself. I started my career in consulting and then I moved mainly in tech. I joined the founding team of a startup and then I had the privilege to work at Google for a long time, for about 10 years across different geographies. And I joined Microsoft 2.5 years ago to lead anything startups for Microsoft across the Middle East and Africa region. What we do in the region is we support founders and entrepreneurs to be successful. So we support startups with access to technology, enabling them to build on Microsoft technology, Microsoft products. But also we support startups on the go-to-market, how we can accelerate their sales and growth, and how we can build also a sense of community, right? So to unlock knowledge, transfer, and sharing from founders to founders. So we started operating a good 2 years ago in the region, and we start seeing our community growing. And we have global programs and regional programs that we made available for startups and founders here in the region. We are inspired by the opportunity to change mindsets and to empower more founders and entrepreneurs in this part of the world, also with an eye on underrepresented minorities and diversity, right? So female founders, women entrepreneurs that we are supporting in our programs to make them more successful. That's a wonderful question. What is a startup, right? So when we close our eyes and we think what a startup is, we always think about these founders in a garage that are trying to build something new, exciting, innovative, right? So, but ultimately what a startup is, you don't have to be in a garage, right, to build a startup. And you don't necessarily have to build the next breakthrough thing to be considered a founder, right? So you might work on an incremental innovation or a new idea that you're trying to implement. What a startup is an organization, is a company that is trying to prove itself. It's trying to, first of all, it's trying to solve a real problem. And so it's coming out with some ideas and validation, to make sure that solution has an addressable market. And ultimately, a startup is a company that is trying to achieve what we call in the ecosystem the product market fit. So making sure that there is a product that is solving a real problem, but there is also a market that is ready to accept that product, right? So that you can really find customers that are paying for the product or the services that you are building. So this is what a startup is about. And a startup usually goes through different phases, right? So you start as a founder with an idea, and you start with an idea because usually you have a pain point or you see a real challenge, you see a problem, and you want to solve for it, right? So and then you come with your idea. But then your idea needs to move ahead in what we call the stage of development, right? So which is building a prototype, building an MVP, what we call a minimum viable product. And the way to do that as a founder, you do activities around discovering your customers or validating your customers. So you have an idea, you build a prototype, you put it out there, you start getting the first feedback, you see the initial users, adopting your solution. Maybe you start getting the first paying customers, and then you validate that there is an addressable market for your product or idea, and that thing gets to the next stage where once you have found product market fit and you see, hey, there is an addressable market for this, you're ready for the next stage, which is taking that thing to the stage of growth, right? So because you need to have more customers in order to be profitable, in order to achieve your objectives from a business perspective, and to sustain the business, right? To sustain the growth of the business. This is ultimately what a startup is about. So you have different stages of development, from ideation to prototyping, minimum viable product, and growth and scale. Usually these stages of development are parallel to what we call stages of funding. In order to sustain the growth of your business, you will start at certain point during the journey to turn out for money that you need to raise in order to sustain the next phase of growth, right? So you start maybe with family and friends, then you turn to the first angel investors. Then when the business starts growing and you have a real prototype that you can take to the market, you probably go to the venture capital in order to raise the money that you need and the funds that you need to build your business. This is what a startup is about. What excites me more about the startup as an organization is the fact that you have in front of you people, the founders, that have a purpose, that really see a real problem and want to solve for it. And they accept to take some risks. Sometimes it's their own time, their own resources, their own money. And they decide to use those resources to implement something that they believe in. And they start building, the initial team that is inspired by that vision. And with that, they start building the products that they take to the market, and they get the validation from the markets, and they keep going, right? So what is inspiring is that the startup can really create new jobs, can be a key stakeholder when we talk about economic growth. But again, more importantly, the startup is a company that is trying to really address a real problem that we are facing individually or as a society, and they're trying to come up with a real solution for that. I think that there is no age when it comes to entrepreneurship, right? So there are some researches showing that the most successful entrepreneurs are second-time entrepreneurs, because probably they had the experience, right? Whether the first startup or the first startups that they built were successful or a failure, but they got experience in order to build their next ventures. But sometimes entrepreneurship is all about changing mindsets, and that starts with youth. And you have youth that taps into entrepreneurship because they see real problems that they're facing from their perspective, and it starts from there, right? So no matter what, I think that there is a real impact that STEM education can have on entrepreneurship. Also because, to me, entrepreneurship is more a mindset, is the way you look at solving problems, right? So as an entrepreneur, you see a real problem and you try to solve it. So the component of problem solving is key, and the component of problem solving is key also to the STEM education, right? So when we talk about science, technology, engineering, and math, of course, there is a component which is more the hardware of education, right? So the concepts, the competence that these topics come with. But there is also a software component, which is what we call the soft skills, right? So soft skills could be very important for entrepreneurship because are things like problem solving, critical thinking, communications, working in a team, right? So all of these things are elements that you as an entrepreneur, you need to master, you need to be aware of, you need to have experience about in order to build a successful team, a successful startup, right? So if you think about it, when you talk about entrepreneurship as a young entrepreneur, what you need to do is not only think about what it takes to build a startup, right? So that comes with experience, but it's also what the impact that you want to leave behind. What is the problem that you are trying to solve? How technology can help you solve that problem? What's the domain expertise that you need and the core competencies that you need to build within your teams in order to build that product, build a solution to the problem that you are seeing, right? So it's a mix of hardcore skills in specific topics, right? So when we say we are building a tech startups, yes, we need engineers, right, that are able to hard code, to do the coding, the implementation, the deployment, the integration of your solution with third-party services, for example, and so on and so forth. But as an entrepreneur, you need to coordinate that with the soft skills element of your startup. So you need also you yourself as the first employee of your company and the first hires that you take in your team. You need to get people that are able to look at the problem from different angles. You need to bring in diversity of experiences and backgrounds within your teams. You need to face a problem from a critical thinking perspective to see and be able to factor in feedbacks that you're getting from your first users, for example. You also need to be able, for example, to run experiments and maybe multiple experiments in parallel. And that comes with skills that you learn as STEM education as well, right? So how can you run an experiment? How can you take a control group, a test group, and validate your assumptions, for example? How can you apply a sort of an intelligence to the feedbacks you're getting from your users or your customers in order to distill the signal from the noise? Right? So how you are taking this forward, right? So in different phases of development, and you make the whole thing grow. So I would say in a nutshell, then STEM education is really critical. Instilling this concept that entrepreneurship is a mindset early on from youth, I think is very important to make also youth familiar with the concept of learning from failures, right? So having this sort of growth mindset where you are willing to lean into uncertainty, to take certain risks, to learn from failures, to build on top of each other, as if you were thinking about there is a sort of a API economy, right? So there are certain things that have been already invented. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but you need to build on top of each other and learn from each other in order to build your product or your solution, right? So, and the role that STEM education can play here is critical, because it can really open up the mind of youth, of young people, instill this mindset of being an entrepreneur, right? So to think about problems in an entrepreneurial way, to try to find solutions to problems that exist, to try to simplify complex problems into smaller parts and start focusing on solving for those, to come together as a team, so to leverage the skills that other people have in order to come together and find innovative solutions, and then to implement all of that, so to make it happen, right? So to build a culture that you need to have, a culture of experimentation, a culture of growth in the startup that you're building. Again, STEM education plays a critical role at a critical age for young people in order to master those skills, which is again a mix, a melting of hardcore skills, more competence-based, but also soft skills that enable young people to think differently about a certain problem and to get started with entrepreneurship. I think schools play a big role into this conversation about how to empower entrepreneurship in young people, right? So why? Because schools are those places where young people are learning by definition, right? So there is already an environment that is built for students to interact, to learn, to practice. And it's a sort of a gym, right? So where you train your muscle, and it should be the same around entrepreneurship, right? So is another set of skills that school should invest to train young people on, right? As we said before, is a mixture of hardcore skills and softcore skills, right? Soft skills, as we said before. But what is important is that the schools become sort of a platform, right? So that is an open platform that can allow students to get the concepts, get the learnings, get exposed to what entrepreneurship is, start practicing it, right? So there could be different ideas where you can start with different initiatives, like allowing students to experiment, allowing students to get closer to specific areas of entrepreneurship, which could be the implementation, the deployment, the development of apps, for example, or things like that. And working in a team, having innovation lab projects, so that students can come together and allow this platform to be open, right? So the students should be an enabler, right? The school should be an enabler for students to practice all of these skills and go out there, go out of the building and validate their ideas, validate their assumptions. That should be the trick. The thing is, entrepreneurship is all about solving a real problem and validating it, finding a market. So there is a product market fit and there is an addressable market. There are users that adopt your solutions and so on and so forth. So you cannot achieve that only by staying within the building or doing just sort of scenarios, simulations, and that sort of things. You need to allow the students somehow at some point also to get out of the building and put their ideas out there, act as if they were real founders and try to validate their ideas, get feedback, bring that into this cycle of development, start building a prototype. The good news is that today, in order to build all of that, you don't need huge expenses or upfront costs, right? So the way you can run experiments today, the digital technologies available today, allow this sort of development at a relatively cheaper cost than it used to be a few years back. The other thing, and this is a personal experience, I've been myself acting as a mentor for students from K12 schools. I won't mention the name, but this is specifically a school I've been working with here in the UAE. They asked me to mentor a couple of students in a competition. So there was this entrepreneurship initiative the school set with different groups of students. Each one were assigned a sort of a challenge or their own idea to develop. And for me, the task was to mentor them, right? So as I would do with more established entrepreneurs, and mentoring them for a few weeks until there was a final competition where students would have pitched their ideas. There was a judging committee that would have selected the winning students that would have got even more support and resources in order to keep going, keep developing their ideas, right? So now maybe not all of schools are structured to build something like that, or to even integrate entrepreneurship in the curriculum. But I believe a broader number of schools can follow this example, right? Because at the end of the day, whether it's a pure school initiative or it's a school that is also building a partnership with some private sector that can share some of the challenges where they want students to work on, either way, schools already have a platform where students can, first of all, create these teams, can have the time to build around these ideas, can have maybe the support of mentors like I've been doing with some of the students in order to give them some guidance on how to look at a certain problem, how to frame the problem into what is the real problem, what is the solution, is there any competitive angle, what is the business model, what is the go-to-market, what is the objective, the roadmap, and so on and so forth, right? So giving them the mentorship on how to think about that idea so that students can grow and understand what are the key levers, the dynamics of what it takes to build a startup. And by doing that, this turns to be into an experiential learning, right? So again, entrepreneurship by definition is making things happen, is getting things done, right? So you don't want just the students to go through a soft skills sort of training and finalize a certain slides, but you really want them to try to implement that, try to get the feedback, try to do sort of a design thinking exercise to understand who their users might be, who the segments that they're trying to target are. What the channels that they should leverage in order to reach these customers, what partnership they should be creating in order to implement that idea, what potential costs of building that product or that idea would be if anyone else, competitors, are building the same product, and so on and so forth, right? So I believe that schools here play a big role because, again, they have the infrastructure, they have the human capital, right? The youth on this infrastructure, on this platform. So they can connect the dots across many things that the school already had in a meaningful way to inspire the youth and to have them to work around specific challenges, right? So one other example I saw is a school that is working with the private sector. So this specific school has been working with a large startup here in the ecosystem, and the startup is all into sustainability. So the startup shared few key themes that they wanted the school to help them with, and the school said, look, we have students that can propose ideas, or they can work on these themes, and we can structure it on a sort of a challenge or competition, and then the private sector company can come in at the end and see the outcomes of that and see what ideas the students have been working on. And some of them have been not just generating ideas but building prototypes, and so the private sector could have been even more appetite to invest, to give more resources to the ones that were selected in order to keep them going, to see if they see the potential. There could be something valuable here for both sides, right? So again, the schools are enablers for that because they have the human capital they can work on. They have a lot of the components where the students can thrive and connect the dots across, and they can start working on developing their innovation muscle, as we said before, right? So starting from the idea generation, validating their ideas, taking these ideas to a prototype, validating the prototype, and so on and so forth. Again, schools as a platform, open platforms to connect with public or private sector, and probably structuring these exercises as more challenges or competitions that stimulate as well, students to come together, have a real objective, try to compete for a prize or try to have an incentive, right? Why to build something meaningful. But meanwhile, they have the chances to work on their soft and hard skills. They have a chance to turn this education into experiential learning and build something which would be with them forever, right? So the experience they've been going through, it's something that is the most important thing. They would have learned the basics of building a business. They would have tried to be doing that themselves. They would have the key elements in mind when, in the future, they might want to turn into real entrepreneurs or real founders. So they've been going through an experience that would help them from the get-go to consider what are the key things that they should be top of mind for them as potential entrepreneurs. So 3 ways of creating a startup culture. So I would say, first of all, the first one is creating a sort of a day after tomorrow mindset. Because to innovate, you must get out of the habit of thinking solely about today and develop the capacity to plan for the day after tomorrow, right? So if all you think about is in-year revenue, you will always be stuck in the past, right? So you must shift your focus to future-proofing your organization. The second element to create a startup culture, I would say, is investing in your people. So, right, so culture is largely a reflection of your people. What makes the culture are the people within the organization. So if you want a culture of innovation, if you want a startup culture, you need to hire innovators, which if you translate this at an early stage, the school, K12 schools, it's about empowering youth with soft skills, with those skills, that mindset that is really important to, for example, lean into uncertainty, take risks, learning from failure is what we call usually the growth mindset. And finally, I would say the last element of creating a startup culture is this concept of moving yourself into an uncomfortable zone, right? So is trying to take these risks, get out of the routine, try to look at things differently, because this is what helps you merge two aspects of the same coin, right? So one is the creativity, which is everybody wants tolerance for failure, as we said before, willingness for experiment, for example, right? So this creativity of running multiple experiments at the same time, collaborating across different departments, which could be at K12 school, could be collaborating with people from different ages or grades or different domain experts in different topics and so on and so forth. But merging this creativity with discipline, right? Because at some point, as an entrepreneur, as a startup, you want to get things done. You want to make things happen. So it's not enough the creativity angle. You need to add this sort of discipline, in order to, filter the signal from the noise, in order to have strong leadership as well, to make things happen, to get things done, and to move ahead, right? So these are three elements that can create a startup culture. And I think it's very important that we think about entrepreneurship also as a mindset, right? So because that's where it starts from, especially at the school age, where we instill this into our youth, so they believe that entrepreneurship is a way of thinking, is a way of looking at the problems, and it starts with people. So it starts with people that when they come together, they build the culture of the company that they are putting together from the get-go.